The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for our webinar. This is Josh Keeney. I'm the Training and Technical Assistance Coordinator for the Colorado Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And before we get going with our webinar today, I just want to go over some housekeeping items for you all. Just want to let everyone know that you will be on mute for the duration of the presentation. Any questions or comments that you have, we would love to hear those. And so just please type those into the question chat box at any point during the presentation. We'll make sure that we address those. A copy of the PowerPoint and any handouts that we mention throughout the presentation will be provided to you all in a follow-up email. This webinar is also being recorded, and it will be available on our YouTube channel within 48 hours after the presentation, and there will be a link to that recording in your follow-up email, and then a small survey will pop up at the end of our presentation. We would really appreciate if you would provide us some feedback via that survey. So with all of that being said, I want to pass it off over to Derek.
Hi, everyone. Our walled up hearts, breaking down the barriers to healthy masculinity to build bridges between our emotions and others. Really loved the theme of walled up hearts because it really kind of speaks to the masculine socialization, how we are all taught to sort of trap parts of ourselves inside of ourselves, and these parts are essential to our holistic lived experience and essential to ending a culture of rape and sexual assault, domestic violence, and just violence in general. So looking forward to really exploring these dynamics with you all and making that connection between how walled up hearts lead to so much violence in our communities.
Thank you, Derek. To start us off, I just want to go over some learning objectives for our time together today. So after this presentation, learners will be able to better describe the impact male privilege and toxic masculinity have on society and individual males, analyze the idea of transformative masculinity and ways to promote it, and generate new presentation tools to discuss masculinity inside of your community. So to start us off today, want to communicate that we're going to take a oppression or anti-oppression framework to how we discuss all of the topics today. And so want to just open up with why it's important and why it's beneficial to use this type of framework when discussing masculinity and male privilege and all of those related issues. So really seeing that violence is a tool of oppression. Connected to that, violence is almost always preceded by dehumanization and disrespect. And we recognize that those dynamics of dehumanization and disrespect are direct results of oppression. Therefore, the violence that ensues afterwards is also going to be a tool of oppression. We're going to take a look at how male privilege in many ways, as in other forms of privilege as well, is maintained through the use of violence and disrespect. And then also, as we kind of dive into our discussion around masculinity and male privilege, kind of pointing out the unique ways that male privilege exists, in that the behaviors that men engage in to maintain that privilege or that man status often comes at a cost for individual males, which is a little bit of a different dynamic than some other forms of privilege that we find inside of the oppression structure and framework inside of our culture. So to kind of guide this discussion, we are going to use the 4 eyes of oppression model to discuss all of this. I want to do just a quick kind of overview of the 4 eyes of oppression model, just in case some of you who are listening in haven't seen this model before. So it operates off of 4 main levels or structures of oppression, and that's the ideological, institutional, interpersonal, and internalized. So the ideological is really the ideas that we have in our culture. You can connect this into stereotypes and all of those other sorts of dynamics around seeing people based on their identities as more or less than. It's the very conscious development of all of the isms racism, sexism, heterosexism, all of this is isms that we find inside of our culture, very focused on the othering sort of dynamic that we find in our culture based on the identities. And then also just really want to highlight the idea that like words have power, that age-old adage of sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me really is untrue in a lot of ways. Like really, really, really is. Words are so powerful. They can empower us and they can also cut us so deep. Words, the language that we're provided, in many ways structures the way that we understand ourselves, we understand other people, we understand the world around us, and therefore how we interact with the world around us. So words have power, and those ideas inside of this ideological realm, really, you boil all of it down, and it is based on the language that we have.
Words also coupled with the images that we receive of ourselves, whether that be women in media or people of color in media, white men in media, paired with those words, I think is a huge dynamic too. So
absolutely, they say image or a picture says 1,000 words. So absolutely. Absolutely. And then I had randomly picked the light bulb fishbowl here. Normally we see the light bulb used to signify the ideological realm, but I liked the idea of this fishbowl in that words can expand our understanding of the world, but they can also and oftentimes do limit our understanding of the world. And so I really thought that this really spoke to the ideological structure around oppression and the way that we're supposed to see ourselves and other people in the world around us. Institutional level, it's really focused on these systems that reinforce and manifest the ideology that we were just discussing. Particular groups of people having the power to dictate what those systems say and how they operate based on the ideological understandings of who is more valuable, who is more credible, who deserves to have power. And so we see that manifest, like you had just said, in representations in the media, how the medical field operates, the legal, who has access to education, what type of education, how our government runs, how our military, law enforcement is structured. The next level is the interpersonal level, and this is really how individuals play out violence on each other based on those ideological understandings of oppression, and recognize that violence is both verbal and physical. So it's the whole continuum of violence, from demeaning jokes and discussing people or dynamics based on stereotypes, threats of violence, and then all the way up to actually enacting that physical violence. One interesting thing to think about is that the dominant groups often aren't actually consciously oppressive. It's so ingrained inside of our culture, these ideological understandings of more or less than, that those people in the dominant groups are never really afforded or challenged to do the introspection to really look at these sorts of issues. So they take it as it's the norm, and that it's completely okay for them to see themselves and other people in the way that they do. So they're not consciously oppressive, even though it is very, very oppressive. And then a little bit of a kind of cognitive equation down there at the bottom, in that prejudice plus power equals the isms. Take racism, for example. There's no such thing as reverse racism. That's because racism is connected to white people's prejudice against people of color, but connected to the societal power that they have based on their white identity. With that, when individuals lacking that societal power, yes, they may hold prejudice, but it's not really going to be, like in this case, racism.
At that third bullet point, again, many people in dominant groups are not consciously oppressive. To me, this is the key dynamic that I have to keep in my conscious empathy as I'm working with men and boys, meeting them where they're at. Not shaming them for where they're at, but helping them to understand where they're at. And we're going to talk more about that as we go.
Our last level inside of the 4 I's is the internalized level. And really this is speaking to how we all internalize the ideological understandings around oppression. And this occurs for both individuals inside of the targeted and dominant groups. Those feelings of being more or less than. So individuals feeling more superior, or that they deserve more or have more credibility based on a privileged identity that they carry, and then also the negative implications that individuals inside of targeted groups feel as well, that they're less than, that they're not as good as, and the detriment that that has to individuals. So that internalized dynamic happens for all individuals. It transcends both the privileged and the subordinated identities. And another interesting fact of just how oppression exists is that after time, the oppressors or the dominant group really don't have to exert any more pressure on the targeted population, because the targeted group will eventually internalize all those messages and carry that dynamic out on themselves and each other. In a lot of ways, we see this as horizontal violence. It really is a big dynamic in that divide and conquer aspect of how oppression recreates itself and maintains itself.
Yeah, this really is prevalent to me in the Me Too movement. After many, many years, folks are finally able to band together and give word to their experience and bring that public. But for so long, victims haven't just been blamed by perpetrators and society at large, but they've been blamed by themselves as well. So we're at this tipping point right now where we're having this dialogue as a society, and it's a real pivotal point for us.
Absolutely. So just want to tie all of this together really quick by talking about the four eyes as an interrelated system. All four aspects, they support and maintain each other. One will not exist without the other elements. And in order for us to engage in truly meaningful change, we have to address all four aspects or four levels of these eyes in order to really be able to engage in meaningful, full-scale progressive change. So now that we've talked about the general framework for the four eyes, we want to go back through it really quickly and discuss how we can plug in issues with masculinity and male privilege directly into the four eyes, and really starting to narrow in on male issues and the problems that patriarchy and masculinity cause for society. And then towards the individual level, we'll start talking about the negative impact that it has on men as individuals. So for the ideological level, we selected phallocentric or phallocentrism sort of dynamic to connect with the ideological understanding. And the definition of phallocentric is centered on or emphasizing the masculine viewpoint. So this makes sense in the way that the ideas that we have, the images that we see, how we understand each other and ourselves is really based in a very, very masculine sort of dynamic. And next to that, it allows, or it's elevating the male identity. And so really being able to, it provides men with that power to define, and male culture with the power to define what is right, what is wrong, what's acceptable, what's worthy or what's valued, what's undervalued. And so just want to touch on three quick ideas just to kind of showcase this. The idea of strength. Is strength one's ability to exert their power over somebody else? That's traditionally how we've seen it through a masculine lens. Or is strength the courage to be able to stand up for other people and to stand up for what is right, and recognizing that that might not only benefit you, but you're looking out for your fellow humans. We're all in this together. And so that idea of how strength is defined, looking at the idea of work and what is work and what is valued work. Historically, the idea around domestic labor being not valued in a monetary sense really in any way, shape, or form, and then also very much expected that females be the one that carry that burden of doing all of the domestic labor, where men are the ones that go day to day into their jobs and do that type of work that's actually monetarily valued inside of society. And then that connects into
Muted. Unmuted.
oh, I'm sorry, everyone. I guess we got muted there. I apologize. If somebody could chime in and let me know where we left off, we'll double back on anything that we missed. I'm sorry, it just randomly decided to mute us. um, but the political realm, I have been able to get the image out of my head of a bunch of men. Okay, excellent. So somebody let me know that it happened where we were discussing work. But the idea of work, what is valued work? Historically, men going off to work and they're actually earning money, where it was really that dynamic of female stayed at home, did domestic labor, which is an incredible amount of work, but not being monetarily valued. And then that idea of the breadwinner, that patriarchal household dynamic, in the person that makes the money is able to dictate the rules and how the household runs. And then inside of the politics, the disparity inside of the ratio of men to female, males to females, as our senators, as our legislators. And then I haven't been able to get it out of my my head recently, since I saw a video of a bunch of men sitting and standing around a table, and it turns out that it was a picture that was taken of all of these men that were so pleased with themselves as they were trying to pass reproductive right sort of legislation and deciding what women can do with their own bodies, and there wasn't a single female inside of the picture. And I know this happens in so many other areas of the politics, but it just really, really struck me to the core when I saw that picture.
Yeah, and something that comes up for me within this realm of fellow-centric thought is that black males were actually given the right to vote in this country before white females. So it kind of gives you a glimpse of how deeply ingrained patriarchy is, to where those with racial power saw their male privilege as even more important than their racial identity in this country.
Next, we are looking at the institutional level, and we picked patriarchy for this, in that inside of the definition, it's identifying a system of society or government in which men hold the power. So going back to what you were discussing about voting, the gendered career paths that we see, and then also inside of just looking at a single career path, the pay gap that happens between males and females, and then also the glass ceiling that we see in so many different institutions.
Really, a lot of this patriarchy is upheld by the silence around the dynamics that uphold these privilege. And as we are taking that silence away and having these discussions, there are steps, baby steps towards addressing these issues. But as long as we were silent, these inequities would continue to persist and even grow beyond where they're at right now. And I know it's not great right now, but I think this is the path to chipping away at that.
The next level of interpersonal, we decided to kind of identify just men's violence to connect with the framework inside of the interpersonal level. And so really this is everything that's encompassed inside of the violence against women's discussion. And I think that that's also very telling, in that historically it's been talked about as, the violence against women's movement, where the active agent, the men that are perpetrating this violence, are left out of the conversation. And in so many ways, that is one of the ways that oppression and violence maintains itself and recreates itself, is the individuals that are responsible for the violence having the privilege to not be a part of the conversation, to not look at how they and their or other individuals with those same identities contribute to the problem at hand.
I couldn't have said it better myself, Josh. Project PAVE just received a government grant from the Office of Violence Against Women, an Engaging Men and Boys grant. Though the Office of Violence Against Women hasn't changed their title, they are taking a new approach right now to engage us guys and work in the masculine culture, which I think is a step. But I would like to see that office be retitled and for masculinity to own our piece in that, because we all know that the majority of that violence against women and children and even other men is at the hands of men. So,
absolutely. And I love there's a great segue into what I want to talk about around the bullet of violence as a standard. Is, yes, we recognize that men are the perpetrators of the majority of violence inside of our culture, but because of the phallocentric ability to kind of define and structure the standards for our culture, violence is a standard inside of our culture. So anybody can be a perpetrator, anybody can be a victim of any type of violence. Obviously, we work inside of the gender-based violence field, so seeing that, and we're also seeing more and more discussion about men being victims, and then also females and non-male identified individuals being perpetrators. But in a lot of ways, like that's still normalized because of that hyper-masculine standard of violence is acceptable inside of our culture. And then I also wanted to talk really quick around this point around just kind of highlight the idea of like mass shootings and active shooter incidents, and the connection that we need to make to these with gender. Largely historically, these issues have been framed and discussed around mental health issues and access to guns. Yes, these two things do pertain to the conversation, but it's a little short-sighted in the way that they solely focus on these issues. Research has shown that more women access mental health services than men in large measure inside of our culture. And so if this mental health issue was really a key pivotal point in why we do see these active shooter incidents, then we would see a closer ratio of females being the perpetrators of this type of violence. But it's like 95, 98% of all of these type of aggressors or perpetrators are men. So we need to look at males and masculinity when we're discussing these incidents. Often it is boys or men carrying out this type of violence because they've felt that they've been slighted, or somebody has done them wrong, they've lost a marriage or something like that. And in a lot of ways, it's them trying to get back into their gender box and trying to regain that male status. And so we see it all the time inside of the male gender box. You're outside of the male gender box. The most appropriate way to try to get back in terms of society's eyes, is to fight, to use that violence. And so we see men engaging in this type of violence as they're feeling slighted. And so it's very much a gendered dynamic. Yes, obviously access to guns is a big issue inside of why we see the amount of violence or gun violence inside of our culture. But I really don't ever see in the media the discussion around masculinity in male culture and its connection to these types of violence.
Yeah, it's really at the core of how we are socialized, and I think that's why it's important to be less shaming of males and more empathetic towards how we've been taught to develop psychologically. me and the lady I'm married to, we have a 5-year-old son and a 3-year-old daughter, and we're practicing a form of gender neutral parenting. Although, you know, the society that we live in, our little girl, she kind of gravitates towards the princesses, and our little boy, he gravitates towards the superheroes. But we are parenting them in equal tones and discipline. So it's not a male female. Male gets harsher treatment, female gets lesser treatment. Um, and we just watched the movie Christmas Story recently, and it was interesting to me because when the Ralphie with his BB gun came up, both little boy and little girl said guns are bad and they can hurt people and they can hurt ourselves. So this idea of nature, to me, that all boys are born biologically inclined towards violence, to me, I've seen in my lived experience as a parent that that is really a myth. Our little boy wears long hair, kind of has the native people kind of flow to his hair, and he often gets called a girl, but he will correct them. So it's interesting because he, as a 5-year-old, is able to advocate for himself and still identifies as a masculine person, but has, you know, feminine hair characteristics, which to me, that's just a feminized thing. It's nothing feminine about having long or short hair. And the same thing with emotional processing, which we'll talk more about here momentarily.
And then that third bullet is discussing or highlighting a lot of the issues that we see or identified inside of like the sexual violence continuum, and how just like all other forms of oppression and how all of the four eyes are connected, the progression of violence or the different levels of violence are all connected. The catcalls, the derogatory language inside of our culture is directly connected to that dehumanization and disrespect dynamic that then allows it or normalizes the idea that it's more acceptable to carry out violence on those individuals, that there are those derogatory or those less than sort of ideals inside of our culture. And so wanted to also at the bottom there talk about the horizontal violence, but this time inside of like male culture, and so inside of the dominant group. Not only does that horizontal violence happen for targeted groups, but specifically in a lot of ways for the male dynamic here, that alpha male complex is there's always that competitive nature, that violence between each other and then everybody else that is not inside of that dominant group, but just really highlighting that violent, aggressive, domineering sort of dynamic is manifested in towards everyone inside of the culture.
That really speaks to why I didn't have this education when I was in high school. I didn't have this education when I was in college. Most of the boys and young men that I was friends with in high school and college, we had this alpha complex dynamic going on. So our relationships were really rooted in one-upping each other. And over time, those relationships have failed to continue. So there was no benefit to that in my experience, and the relationships that maintain for me are those that are built on dignity towards each other and support of each other. So a lot of our male conditioning leads us to even fractured or failing platonic male to male relationships.
Absolutely, and that dynamic really resonates with me. So I served in the Marine Corps infantry, and I feel as though we would see a significant reduction in the PTSD of vets if there was more of a feminist leadership, feminist philosophy, feminist values embedded into the military, because it's such a bootstrap culture that you're supposed to be the man's man. You're a warrior. You're supposed to be able to handle anything that's thrown at you. And the idea that like if something's bugging you, like the circumstances that military vets are put in, extremely traumatic, and the dynamic of not feeling safe to like confide in your brothers in arms in how it's impacting you because you need to maintain that status, or that that bravado of being a warrior, and you're bulletproof, and you've got this armor, not only in terms of the physical sense but that emotional sense as well, which I think cripples individuals and really is a big component in why we see so much PTSD, because it's not acceptable to be able to talk about that and actually process those experiences and those feelings. For our last eye, we wanted to just discuss gender roles and those gender role dynamics that we see inside of our culture. So for the female gender box, those feminine characteristics, which in our phallocentric patriarchy culture is highly undervalued and stigmatized in ways, not only for those traits inside of females, but that idea of those traits inside of men as well, and all of the negative consequences that causes. And then looking at the male gender box, the idea of being violent, being assertive, being aggressive, all of those types of characteristics, which are actually privileged or valued inside of our society. Think about the characteristics for like Fortune 500 CEOs. There's been some interesting research that says a lot of those individuals have like sociopathic tendencies, which are a very like hyper masculine group of traits. What do we look for inside of our military, our police force, government? Many of those are those what we would identify as more masculine traits inside a society, but all of the negative consequences that has for individual males when trying to embody all of those. And it really does kind of connect back into what I was just speaking to about the PTSD. And you're trying to engage in all of that bravado and that presentation of being a male to where you don't actually understand yourself, and it's that walled up heart, and you're so disconnected from your emotions, and therefore really have an inability to express that to other people, and the connection that you can have with other people. And then do want to just mention that how detrimental this gender binary is to people that fall outside of the binary. It leaves out so many people of this conversation, and as detrimental as this binary dynamic is for females, it's even more detrimental for non-gender conforming or transgender individuals as well.
At PAVE, we have through the years practiced the exercise of doing the gender box activity, where we explore masculinization and feminization and these characteristics that aren't really masculine or feminine, but are just characteristics that any and all of us really can use to our benefit or our detriment. And really kind of to wrap that activity up, we go to this sort of humanization of these characteristics. So when I think of non-gender binary, I think of humanizing all people. Earlier this week, I saw a man named Dan Griffin do a presentation, and his gender box, his way of approaching that was to list out the man rules. And it was really interesting how the man rules are typically full of what not to do. Have no fear, be emotionless, no emotions, don't show any signs of vulnerability or weakness. And then in a sort of lesser emphasis, we're taught to respect females and respect women and girls, but at the same time, we use language that polices ourselves to get into this gender box that's based in feminine language. So it's really kind of a contradictory kind of masculine culture, where on one hand we're taught to respect, but on the other hand we call each other girl names to say get back into that box, and we're devaluing femininity in that same context, but then also feminizing our emotions, which I'll hold my tongue on that because I could talk about that all day. We'll get to that here momentarily.
And I do want to just take a second and apologize. I'm seeing a couple of comments and correcting some of the language that we're using, and I really appreciate everybody that has mentioned something. And I will really work to use women instead of female throughout the rest of this presentation and as I move forward inside of this work. So thank you. It was something that I was a little blind to, and so thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah, and I appreciate that apology there, Josh, and thank you for your comment. I do think that in this field of advocates, we do have a tendency, though, to get kind of bogged down in the vernacular, and have less emphasis on sort of the fact that we're in this together. So no shame to us for using female and male. We weren't doing that in a way that was misogynistic. It was just sort of different terms for framing femininity and masculinity. So,
But we appreciate your comments. Thank you.
so what needs to change? There's some foundational things that can be changed in our own hearts, but it does take holding each other accountable, similar to the women that had the courage to tell us to change our language there. So perceptions of femininity is at the top of the list for me. In this sort of binary framework of how we use language, we often associate strength with masculinity and weakness with femininity. When I'm doing workshops with middle school football teams or co-ed groups in a high school setting, I get to this gender box piece, and when they tell me what I'm going to get called if I'm not living up to that stereotypical standard, oftentimes the word PUSSY comes up, and I like to address that in the moment by having them time lapse me to the day that I was born. So I kind of squat down on the ground and I have my hands covering my facial hair and say, imagine behind this rough exterior there's a baby somewhere, and this is the first day that I'm on this planet, and where did I just come from? And they get some, smirks and some laughs, and ultimately I dig out of them the womb. Yes, okay, well, where did I pass through after I came out of the womb? And they'll say the vagina. And I just, it's laughable, but I say, I want you to imagine this first day that I was born, that I can speak English fluently. So do you imagine that first day I turn to the doc after seeing I have a penis and say, hey, doc, give me the blue hat, because it's obvious. And then I turn up to my mom and I say, Mom, that was incredibly weak what your vagina just did right there. That was the most weak thing that I've ever seen. They laugh about that because it's laughable, obviously. But the point there for me is to sort of mock our culture of devaluing femininity, because to frame the female body part as a symbol of weakness is contradictory. It's hypocritical. It's kind of a foundational level of self-hate right there. None of us would be here without the strength of femininity. And that sacrifice, that courage, that power to carry someone around inside for 9, 10 months, and then to go through this traumatic birthing process is something that I deeply believe should be held up as sacred and valuable, and we should all look to that body part as something that we should all respect, which to me is another foundational piece of the rape culture, is just devaluing that body part. Because when I hear men use the word, it's not in just a weak tone. They use it in a degrading, like a disgusting tone as well. So challenging them to reflect upon that and making it personal seems to hit home a lot quicker than me going and saying, don't use that language, that is wrong. They're likely to say F you to that. So finding creative ways to really engage logic and reason, I see is a lot more effective. And then how we as men process and perceive our emotions. So in this society that devalues femininity, we also frame our emotions as a feminine trait. I don't view emotions as feminine or masculine. To me, they're human, and they're an important part of us. So I challenge young people, adults included, to reflect upon how we are taught to strengthen our minds. We are all taught to go to school and get educated, whether we do that or not. We're all ingrained in this society that says, strengthen your mind, it'll be great for you. We're all taught to eat healthy and exercise, even if we don't. That's kind of the common narrative in our culture. But in the same vein, in masculinity, emotions is taught that it's like an alien part of ourselves. So not only is it feminized, it's not supposed to be there. So as opposed to exercising this muscle that is our emotions, it becomes sort of atrophy in our body. So really owning our emotions as a human essential part of us, and discussing practical ways to exercise them so that we can build holistic health. And young people come up with all the answers. I don't give them the answers, they give me the answers. Talk to somebody. It's a great way to exercise your emotions. Write in a journal, write music, do art, play sports. I hear these aggressive releases, and I always push back on that because I think it's a healthy part to exercise and release physical aggression, but it's typically not what's causing the anger or the pain that's going on to our emotions. So I always use myself as an example. I used to play football, and when I played football, all of my pain, all of my trauma, all of my problems went away for that brief 2 hours I was out there. But football was not what was causing that pain and that trauma. So addressing that with safe people, if it requires us to get a therapist, or really building a network of people that are around us, even if we don't have that in our household, of friends who will treat us non-judgmentally and have that active listening and that reciprocated in our relationships. So that leads us to the next point of being in relationships. My conditioning as a male-bodied person was to be dominant in relationships, to be in control of relationships, whether that's friendships or dating relationships. So really reframing the way that we view ourselves in relationships so that we see whoever we're in relationship with as an equal, regardless of the different skill sets. So I might be able to do more push-ups than Monique, the lady I'm married to, but I'm not able to have babies, and I don't have the strength to do that. So honoring our differences, as opposed to my value is greater because I'm a male-bodied person and I can score touchdowns on Sunday, and that pays millions of dollars, and you just stay at home and work with the kids. Well, there's no just staying and working home with the kids. I got the opportunity to be the main caregiver to our kids in the first 4 years of their lives, and I can testify that the work that people are staying at home and doing is, to me, a lot more strenuous, a lot more demanding than the work that I get to do for 40 hours that makes money. I don't want to put my work down, but at the same time, bringing those other domestic jobs up as equal and valid and valuable. And then conflict resolution is really a problematic culture within masculinity, as we're taught to shut up with our emotions and fight with our fists. So violence against ourselves and shutting up our emotions, trapping them inside of us. As advocates, we understand the detriment that bottling up emotions does. It leads to depression, it leads to anger issues, it leads to isolation, it leads to suicidal ideology. So really finding healthy ways to process these emotions gives us a platform to resolve conflict, so that we're not just resorting to anger, which is typically layers of sadness, jealousy, all these other emotions underneath that. So helping us understand as guys that when we resort to violence, it creates a cycle of violence, whether that's guy to guy or domestic violence in the home. Or even child abuse. And then this last bullet of sexuality, this really hits home for me. I remember being 10 years old and riding the bus to the 5th grade. And I was about 2 weeks into the 5th grade. I was 10 years old. And I was making a friendship with a young guy. And on the way home one day, he says to me that he lost his virginity to one of our classmates' sister. And I was like, oh, that's cool. Kind of played it off. Got home later and asked my sister what virginity was, because I had no idea. And then I was blown away. Like, he did what? Oh my God. So really, at the age of 10, I was already getting this pressure to lose my virginity, as if that is a symbol of becoming a man. For too many young boys, they do see that as the path to manhood, and they become a man by losing their virginity. And it's always heterosexually biased, but ultimately having those conversations, what does it really mean to be a man? And we talk about responsibility and respect and providing and having work ethic. And then basically highlight, is that any different than what it means to be a woman? And the answer is no. So what it means to be a healthy man is really in line with what it means to be a healthy woman. But then there's this part of sexuality that, as guys, we're not just pressuring each other to lose our virginity at a young age. We're pressuring each other to objectify females and see them as objects as opposed to equals. I remember being at a basketball game the same year when I was 10 years old, and a young lady walking by, a girl actually, and I kept watching the basketball game that was going on, and my teammates followed her down the court with their eyes. And then my teammate tapped me and said, "Hey, what's up with you, D? Are you gay?" And I didn't really quite know why, but that point was one of a multitude of times. I had that same question asked to me, or that same language thrown at me in middle school and high school and college and all the way in the NFL, even as a married man. So it was really this pressure to not just be heterosexual, but be aggressive towards females. And I ask the young guys, if we're teaching ourselves to be aggressive towards women and girls, what kind of culture, what kind of environment do we create for women and girls? And they'll go right to the answer, well, it's not safe. And people will answer, yes, sexual assault, rape happens. So as opposed to just dealing with the symptoms, which is a young guy is now sexually assaulted a girl or a woman, I think we need to go all the way upstream into our collective socialization so that we address this psychological development where we're being taught to be aggressive. Because oftentimes the good guy at a young age is not aggressive, and then this socialization pushes him to be that. And then when you go off to a college campus and you have alcohol, haven't been trained to use that, and there's no adult supervision, bad things happen. And then that doesn't get addressed in college or after college, because we have to uphold our institutional image of this university. And then these people are in the workforce, and now we have this Me Too movement because of our collective socialization, more so than individual anomalies. This is how we've been taught to be. So it's really important that we all band together and address these dynamics.
Absolutely. And you'd use the term the good guy, which is just an interesting concept to me now these days, because I think in so many ways men use that as like a way to not engage in the conversation or to not do the introspection about how they're connected to that violent male culture and that sexual objectification of women and how that creates a culture of rape culture. Because I hear it all, oh, I'm not a rapist. I've never raped anybody. I'm a good guy. But then a little while later, you hear him crack some sexist joke and all of that. And it's such a big disconnect, I think, for so many men, and not seeing that type of ideological language that they're using and the way that they manifest that and embody that is actually, yes, they might not be a perpetrator of sexual violence, but that normalizes the violence towards women for individuals who do engage in that type of behavior. So yes, they might not be the actual perpetrator, but they're contributing to a culture that normalizes and rationalizes sexual violence.
Absolutely.
And not just towards women, but men as well. Men to men sexual violence as well.
I used to think I was a good guy, and then I saw this gender box activity, and I saw the language use, and I was like, whoa, I'm not a good guy. I have some work to do. And now, as an advocate for going on 6 years with Project PAVE, I still wouldn't consider myself a good guy. I have a lot of progress to be made. I have a lot of work to do. But that, again, goes to the binary framing there. Like, is anyone all good? Is anyone all bad? Well, I'm working to be the best that I can and evolve from this sociological conditioning that I've been ingrained in, but I don't think I'm ever going to be all good. And to own that, we all have work to do, I think is something that's important. And as opposed to me going again and shaming these guys, really empathizing with them, hey, this is where I came from too. You were born into this world that taught you to view femininity this way. What are the unintended consequences? And then if we can own our part in those unintended consequences and see like, okay, now that I'm conscious, if I choose to lean on those, then it's intentional consequences. So we all have a part in this.
Absolutely. I love the idea of, it's constant work. There's always room for growth and there's always room for learning, and really kind of framing this conversation, like, especially when you're working with young men around that is, I think it's important to pull that into the conversation in that you can always look to be better. And this transcends all aspects of privilege and identity. Always looking, and I know I carry a lot of privilege with all of my identities. I'm white, heterosexual, male. So always looking to what can I learn how can I do better? And just like inside of this presentation where we're supposed to be talking about male dynamics, I used a little bit of incorrect language. And so it was a learning experience for me inside of this, where I'm actually inside of this position to be educating others, but it's still a learning experience for me. And I think that validates, especially for like young men, the potential challenges that they might be feeling about how hard it is to engage in this transformative masculinity approach to life, because it really, you addressed it so well in that it's not just learning, it's unlearning and relearning sort of process that we all need to go through because of how pervasive the socialization is for men from such a young age inside of our culture. So bringing that in when you're working with young men to validate that it is a challenge, but day to day you can always look to do better, and you will be better if you're focused on trying to learn and engage in this transformation. And it's not only going to be a benefit to those around you, but it's a significant benefit for you. You're going to lead a fuller, more healthy life. You're going to be so much more connected to the individuals that you love and care about inside of your life.
And on a side note from that, I think it's really important when working with youth and to be really conscious. I bring to the table this transformative alternative to masculinity and this reflection on what was often subconscious masculinity for these young people. So I have to be really supportive as they step out that door to inform them that the other males in your life, boys and men, most have not had these conversations. Most of them, this masculine conditioning is still in their subconscious. So it's really important for them to understand that there could be a danger to themselves to be this masculine person that's transformed the way they practice masculinity. So making sure they're doing that in safe spaces. They might have to put that mask on, and we're going to show a clip here from the mask you live in here momentarily. But sometimes they have to put that mask in to walk home from their school to their house. Sometimes they have to put that mask on when they're transitioning between classes in order to remain safe. So creating these safe spaces is important, but understanding too that not all spaces are safe. And this stereotypical masculinity is what will keep some males safe in their life. And that's true for men as well. So it's a really slippery slope, but the more that we engage men and women, transgender people, and non-binary, all identity folks in this advocacy, the more those spaces will start to expand and grow. But right now, they're still few and far between. So being really conscious and supportive of that dynamic.
Absolutely. And we did kind of have a question that was kind of looking at, okay, what are more like the tangible aspects of how we actually engage in this change? We will hear in a little bit talk about some activities that Derek uses when he's working with youth, and get a little bit more in on the tangible ways that you can really work to engage in this change with youth and men in general. But I also do just want to point out that like any which way inside of the presentation that you can spur a little bit of introspection for men, that is the work. It's not a overnight sort of change that you're going to see in males. One of my big kind of catchphrases that I use now for the work and this sort of dynamic is gentle pressure applied relentlessly. It's that slow but constant kind of push and allowing them the opportunity to learn what that introspection feels like, because for many men they've never been provided an opportunity to sit in a space to be challenged in that way. And so you're not going to have an immediate change in the moment, but it's more you're planting the seed for them to take that and think about it later on, and for it to come back on their radar inside of the different situations and environments that they come across. So really just working in any which way that you can to spur that introspection, because often we're not afforded the opportunity unless we're inside of a space like this. So allowing as much opportunity for them to like understand what that process looks like and how that feels. I think it's a huge benefit and one of the big stair steps towards that change actually occurring for the individuals. All right. We are going to show a video.
So for those of you who have not yet viewed this documentary, I highly recommend it. It's available on Netflix.
Stop crying. Stop with the tears.
Don't cry.
Pick yourself up. Stop with the emotion.
Don't be a pussy. Don't nobody disrespect you. Be cool and be kind of a dick. Always keep your mouth. Nobody likes a tattletale. Bros come before hoes. Don't let your woman run your life. You a bitch. Get laid. Do something. Be a man. Be a man. Grow some balls.
The three most destructive words that every man receives when he's a boy is when he's told to be a man.
We've constructed an idea of masculinity in the United States that doesn't give young boys a way to feel secure in their masculinity, so we make them go prove it all the time.
Within their peer group culture, each of them is posturing based on how the other boys are posturing, and what they end up missing is what they each really want, which is just that closeness.
In good times, guys are like really close to each other, but when things get a little bit worse, you're on your own.
From middle school, I had 4 really close friends. Once I kind of went into high school, I struggle finding people I can talk to because I feel like I'm not supposed to get help.
Our kids get up every morning. They have to prepare their mask for how they're going to walk to school. A lot of our students don't know how to take the mask off. What is it you don't let people see? Almost 90% of you have pain and anger on the back of that paper.
If you never cry, then you have all these feelings stuffed up inside of you, and then you can't get them out.
They really buy into a culture that doesn't value what we feminized. If we're in a culture that doesn't value caring, doesn't value relationships, doesn't value empathy, you are going to have boys and girls, men and women go crazy.
I had anger issues in high school. I felt like an outcast.
I've been suspended at least once every year I was here.
We would just look for trouble and just like try to fight.
Boys are more likely to act out. They're more likely to become aggressive. Most people miss that as depression or see it as a conduct disorder or just a bad kid.
I felt like just giving up on life. So I had suicide thought to my head in 6th grade.
I felt alone for a long time, and I actually thought about killing myself.
Whether it's homicidal violence or suicide violence, people resort to such desperate behavior only when they are feeling shame and humiliated, or feel they would be if they didn't prove that they were real men.
If you're told from day one, don't let nobody disrespect you, and this is the way you handle it as a man, respect is linked to violence.
If I can man up, why step down from that? You feel me?
It's like instinct.
Be a man. For my kids, I was going to end the cycle of masculine narrative here.
So I like to share that resource. I know when the first time I saw that, I was about to sit on a panel to discuss that, and I had to view it before they suggested I do so. And I kind of broke down in tears throughout that movie because it really spoke to my lived experience as far as how I was conditioned to view myself as a male-bodied person. And I take a activity from that. The mask activity, the man that had the dreads, the braids, the dark-skinned man, he does an activity with the boys that helps them reflect on what they're expected to show on the outside of this mask and what they're expected to keep hidden on the inside of the mask. I've adapted that activity throughout the years to work with male and female groups. So I've just been piloting it this year where I have them reflect upon who you're expected to be based on your gender, the perception of your gender, your skin color, your race, your religion, all these these layers of your identity, who you're expected to be from society, from those around you in your community, even from your family. And then on the flip side, I have them reflect. I have this mask on a sheet of paper, and it's two-sided, a mask on both sides. And on the flip side, I have them reflect upon, I ask them to reflect upon who they truly are. And I'll mention, you know, some of us are the same as who we're expected to be, who we truly are. That's the same. But for a lot of us, there's a difference. And the majority of young people that I've done this with are able to view that difference between who they're expected to be and who they truly are, or who they truly want to be. And when it comes to what we want to see change there, it really comes down to understanding first that there are these external expectations. If I'm going to change what's going inside of me, I have to understand how what's inside of me has been planted there first. So having that as a foundation of, yeah, I am socialized to view masculinity and femininity in these ways, and these expectations come with that. But what are my expectations for self? What are my internal values that are from my own moral compass, from my own view of what the purpose of life is? And these are questions that a lot of young people aren't able to answer. So they might leave this activity with just, that is my expectation, and I have not yet thought about who I want to be or who I truly am. But having them, asking them to do this gives a foundation so that they're able to take the subconscious into the conscious. But before taking the subconscious into the conscious, I don't believe that there's a real path to changing these things that lead to the behaviors, because oftentimes our behaviors are based on subconscious ideals that are rooted in trauma, and trauma that hasn't been resolved yet. So helping them get to the root, and I know as therapists you're a lot more equipped at this than I am, but helping them get to the roots of those traumas before they can change their behaviors.
The media is the message and the messenger, and increasingly a powerful one.
In a world of a million channels, people try to do more shocking things to break through the clutter. They resort to violent images, or sexually offensive images, or demeaning images.
When is it going to be enough? There is no appreciation for women intellectuals. It's all about the body, not about the brain. You all saw the photo from the weekend of Hillary looking so haggard and looking like 92 years old. Breast implants. Did you have them or not?
If you waterboarded Nancy Pelosi, she wouldn't admit to plastic surgery.
The fact that media are so derogatory to the most powerful women in the country, then what does it say about media's ability to take any woman in America seriously?
I have close friends that will go to the bathroom and put on like 10 pounds of makeup, and you're at school to learn. I remember 5th grade, I was worrying about my weight, and now I'm in 9th grade, I'm still worrying about my weight.
As a culture, women are brought up to be fundamentally insecure. Media creates consciousness. And if what gets put out there that creates our consciousness is determined by men, we're not going to make any progress. Little boys and little girls, when they're 7 years old, an equal number want to be president of the United States when they grow up. But then you ask the same question when they're 15, and you see this massive gap emerging.
We're shortchanging voices that are urgently needed in public forums from ever getting to the table.
As the most powerful country in the world, if we're not standing for the right values and for the right principles, that's a loss of the world.
You get a woman in the Oval Office, most powerful person in the world, what's the downside?
You mean besides the PMS and the mood swings?
The media treats women like shit, and it's horrible, and it's like, I don't know how we survive it. I don't know how we rise above it.
You can't be what you can't see.
It's extremely important for women to be writing their own stories and giving them to people to really emotionally become impacted by.
The media can be an instrument of change. It can awaken people and change minds. It depends on who's piloting the plane.
Keeps beating like a hammer.
So both of those documentaries, The Mask You Live In and Misrepresentation, are available on Netflix, made by the same producers, and really do a great job of helping us reflect upon the masculine and feminine stereotypical socialization. And I do believe that that is a starting point for boys and girls, to help them understand that there are powers that are external to you that have had power in your life before you came out of the womb, and have basically framed your identity in certain ways. Once they're able to see this, I think that that for me at the age of 27 worked, and I see it happening. Once they have that understanding, that gives them a new ground to really think critically. Back to Josh's point about planting seeds. If all that a young person leaves from a workshop with me is a seed to think further, then I've done a great job. If I've delivered a great workshop and it just lasted for that 60 minutes and they didn't take any critical thought or seeds of thought with them, I have not done my job. So these behavior shifts happen through the choice of the individual. So if I can provide information in creative ways and ask really leading questions that get them to think, then I think that's more important than me providing a variety of information. So again, how do we change it? Understanding the social dynamics. The reason that I am working to progress as a human being is because I have had phenomenal advocates, predominantly women, who have came and shared this knowledge, but in a way that got me to think. They asked questions. They were very creative in their approach in adding activities and analogies and things that kind of get you spinning, getting those wheels spinning. But all of this advocacy was really based in understanding social dynamics. This reflection upon what we want to change and understanding the benefits. So through that social reflection, I was able to see how my socialization left me at a detriment. It left me depressed in a room in a basement by myself, trying to work through these things because I couldn't ask for help. And I didn't know why I couldn't ask for help, because my mom or dad never said I shouldn't ask for help. But there's something in the air that we all sort of have this vulnerability, this susceptibility to whatever that gendered narrative is. So it took me to be about 30 years old before I humbled myself and had the strength and courage to ask for help. Life is going so much smoother now. So if I can help a young person understand the benefit of processing their emotions, and challenge them to not just believe me, but do a science experiment on yourself. I often share a psychological study of psychologists putting 100 people in front of a movie screen and asking 50 of them to hold their emotions in, and the other 50 to let their emotions out. And this is a 60-minute film that they showed them of graphic, horrific images that would make any of us cry. After they showed them that film, they measured on average how long each individual in the audience was able to hold a hand gripper from the weight room. And the results were that those that let their emotions out were able to hold the weight room hand gripper for a longer period of time. And any of us who have had those tears lump up in our throat and we just mush them back down into our chest can really understand that it takes physical energy to trap our emotions inside. So I don't just ask young people to, take my word for it. I say, hold your tears in one time and see how many push-ups that you can do. And then let your tears flow another time and see how many push-ups you can do. See if there's a difference in that weight that's on your chest and how much strength that you have. So really challenging them to tussle with their own reason and logic. And that it leads to the next point of just respecting all parts of ourselves, our emotions as a essential muscle within us, something that makes us human. Ask young people, how many of you want to get married? The majority of them say they do. Those who don't do say they want to be in some sorts of relationships, and those who are asexual do want friendships. So I really challenge them to think, how can we really engage deeply in a relationship without expressing feelings, without having some sort of feelings and emotional connection to other people? So really understanding that that's natural as opposed to that's an alien part of myself. I was meeting with a rugby team recently, and I was blown away by some of the comments that these young guys made. And one of the young guys said that, having healthy affection with your friends. And I was like, wow, a light bulb went off for me there, because as I'm talking about being affectionate and communication, I was really framing that in like, I'm affectionate to the woman that I'm married to, but having affection with your friends and being able to hug them and not seeing that as something other than human. All too often as guys, any male to male affection is labeled gay, so we stigmatize that affection and devalue gay people in that same vein. But really owning that it's natural to be affectionate, and we can show love in many forms, not just to our intimate partner, but to our friends, our family members, our children if we have children, but the whole spectrum of relationships. Our approach at Project PAVE, we just have some projects, some programs that we work with on our violence prevention program. We have what's called the True Man program, which is it could easily be called True Self program, but this program was founded in partnership with the Denver Broncos, and there's definite, pushback on partnering with the Denver Broncos in anti-violence work. But I figured, you know what, why not go to a arena that really is hyper masculine and ingrained in that, and work with those who maybe not be as receptive to this, but who need this just as much as any of us. So the Broncos came to us on the heels of Ray Rice, the former Baltimore Raven, punching his now wife on the elevator. So the NFL got reactionary, and the Denver Broncos was one of those markets that actually wanted to do something. So they came to us on the recommendation of Rosandom, and they said, we have this middle school football program that they're paired with high school coaches. Would you be able to do some programming with them? And we said, yeah, but we want to make sure this isn't just another checking of the box. We want to get some depth and some longevity with them. So we'll be going into our fourth season this spring, working with them, getting 5 60-minute workshops with 15 teams, or 3 90-minute workshops with 15 teams, depending on their choice. But ultimately, we use this mask activity to reflect upon how we are socialized to view masculinity. And we have lots of dialogues around embracing the true parts of yourself and healthy expressions of emotions. We talk about resolving conflicts with other guys. We talk about what it looks like to be in a healthy relationship. So really kind of teen dating violence prevention emphasis. So we're starting to do some work with the high schools, getting some traction, and there are some coaches, and this was kind of the hesitancy initially too, is, all right, there's some old coaches that have been doing this a certain way for a long time, and we imagine that won't change. There is one group of coaches out of all 15 that haven't really been willing to work with me, but even they have got exposed to this, and I've really been pleasantly surprised with the receptivity of the men, because that's where the real change happens, when these men understand what sort of culture we uphold just by using feminine language as an insult or as a tool to toughen these boys up. When they understand that, they're willing to change, and it's slow change, but it's happening. And I think we need to stay in this realm, and I love that Josh is in this work as a former Marine and service member, because I see them as an arena that needs this work deeply as well. So that's what we're doing with the True Man program. And then with the Street Frat project, the Street Frat is a local nonprofit. They're right on the corridor of Colfax, Denver, Aurora corridor there. They are a organization that welcomes boys 14 to young men aged 25, so 14 to 25-year-old males through these doors in this really violent neighborhood that's full of refugees, immigrants, and people of color predominantly, and white folks who are at the low levels of the socioeconomic pyramid. So this is a place of refuge for them between the hours of 4 and 9 most nights of the week, and they come, there's a meal for them every night, and they have activities for them. There's a workout room, there's a meditation room, there's a ping pong table, they have a music room, and it's a safe place where no violence is accepted. And we are bringing our programming here to build some long-term relationships with the volunteers, the mentors, the staff, and the participants to see if we can help support transformative masculinity in that community, and hope to really get that started here in 2018 with the backing of the Office of Violence Against Women, who's funding that work. So really excited about that opportunity. And then there's also a coalition that a lot of the advocates, the male advocates in the Denver and metro area community are joining this Men Up movement, where we are really challenging the male culture to transform. And by saying it's stereotypical to say man up, we're reframing the way that we view that. So men up, let's have the courage to challenge each other. Let's have the courage to own our emotions. Let's have the courage to treat the people we're in relationship with dignity and respect, not just through our words, but through our actions, and truly empower each other.
Absolutely. And I wanted to just share, and I will let everyone know that inside of the follow-up email, we will be providing some documentation that kind of outlines activities that Derek has mentioned, and then this one that I'll mention right now. But I have found a interesting kind of take on the gender box activity that has seemed to really resonate with youth. Have the two gender boxes, female, male, and then we go through one and then the other, and I leave space in between the two boxes. That after we've went through both of those, then I draw another box. And you can also frame, when you're asking for input from the audience for both of the genders, what makes a healthy woman, what makes a healthy man. That sort of dynamic, you can pitch that a couple of different ways, whatever you think is going to resonate with your audience best. But then the third box, I say, what is a healthy human? What's a healthy individual? What are the characteristics of those individuals? And you really do see them kind of go, oh, by the end of the conversation, they realize that you have to pull characteristics from both of the boxes to make that healthy individual box full and holistic. And it can help to do a little bit of introspection for people to go, oh, okay, actually, like I identified that this is a healthy individual, but I pulled characteristics from both gender boxes. So why do I have such a stigma towards feminine characteristics if it's a male? But I will add in to our follow-up email a little description of that and some of the other activities that Derek had mentioned. Is there any other activities that you would like to talk about that you do?
We actually like to go to the heart of actual scenarios. So somebody's getting someone, let's say a male is attempting to get a female at a high school party, overly intoxicated. We like to do real life scenarios, sort of theater or press kind of work, where we give them a scenario and we have them enact healthy responses. We have them practice this, because ultimately when these things come up, we don't want it to be the first time that they've seen or thought about this, because unfortunately these things happen all too often, and we're not in a position of understanding what we can do in that space. So giving them tools where they're able to stay safe and to help people as well. We call it the 3Ds of bystander or upstander intervention. Direct intervention, only if you're safe. Distraction, not going to resolve it, but can temporarily put pause to it. And then delegation, getting the help of others. And then we always say that there's an asterisk next to the fourth one, which is just modeling healthy relationship behaviors in general. These are all part of our curriculum that's called the Path to Healthy Relationships. It's based in safe dates, but really kind of transformed it a bit to fit our audiences. We like to do healthy relationship lists so that they understand their standards in relationships and talk about why and what that looks like for those standards of respect. Not just respect, but what does that look like to you? How does that sound? How does that feel? And on the flip side, we like to do a deal breakers list. These are your boundaries in a relationship. So really helping them, again, to Josh's point, to have some introspection so that they're doing that personal reflection and continuing that. These activities that we do, I'd be more than happy to discuss them with any of you. So my contact information will be in that email that Josh sends out, and I would be more than happy to review. Oh, there's my email right there. So please reach out, and if you have some things that you can teach me, I'm really open to that as well. The reason that I'm able to do this work is because everything that I've learned and continue to learn from people in the field, from people outside the field, from the youth that I'm serving, I often learn a ton from them, and I think that's key to this whole advocacy, is really just being a learner for life and remaining humble.
Absolutely. So we have this here, and actually me and Derek kind of came up with this about 15 minutes before we fired up our webinar here. So it's just kind of general ideas here, but you can run with it just like the way that I had approached the 4 eyes of oppression and connecting in the masculinity and male privilege piece. There's a lot of different headings that you could plug in to get at those issues and connect into the different levels. Here are just a couple concepts about how to, if you want to use this 4 eyes of oppression kind of framework to discuss masculinity, initially talking about the impacts, the negative impacts, the detriment that all of this has, but then also taking that same model to reframing it into that empowerment approach, and what is the benefits, and what does the good side look like. So Derek, would you like to talk a little bit about?
Yeah, I mean, 4 eyes of oppression, I just really like to flip these things on their head. When I started at Project PAVE, we were a teen dating violence prevention emphasis, and most of our curriculum was on the awareness side. And I felt like there was a lack of balance on what we were advocating for. So anytime I am helping to share awareness about the negative aspects of our culture, of our practices and behavior, I like to flip that to the positive side, just so that we're not really perpetuating what we're voting against and really having something to vote for. So when I think of this idea of equity, well, we've been ingrained in this patriarchal dictatorship as a globe of humanity for thousands upon thousands of years, really. So we're really working upstream and against the norm in a lot of ways. So when I think of oppression, I think the flip side is equity. Males have too long been held up too high, and females and diverse identities have been held at the bottom. So bringing the bottom up and the top down to kind of this idea of an institutional pyramid, and I get a lot of discomfort when I talk about this, but all of our work, most of our work organizations and corporations are rooted in this pyramid model, where we have one predominantly patriarch at the top. There are some women in these CEO roles, but it's still a model of hierarchy that is our norm. So shifting that to more of a plateau model, where we share that power as opposed to one leader at the top. Maybe we have multiple leaders in different roles who are experts in their field. So a therapist who makes the same as the executive director because they have that expertise and that experience and that credibility that's proven through their work, and that executive director whose work is valued as well, but holding them to a common standard of pay, so that we have more equitable wage distribution. This is just personal theories and ideas here with the pyramid to the plateau. That's not Project PAVE. The idea of equity, that's personal, and that's Project PAVE. Interpersonal empathy, so as opposed to controlling each other in relationships, empathizing with our individuality. And that shows up in marriages, women and men, men and men, women and women, where one person often has a tendency to be more in control. But really kind of valuing each other in all those forms of relationships, whether friendships or platonic family relationships.
And I think that empathy piece is huge when you're doing the work with youth or really anybody. Think in spurring the introspection around the empathy capacity for individuals really does promote and provide huge gains in learning for individuals. I know when I was going through all of the learning around my privilege and the way that I embodied my manliness and all of that, that in a lot of ways that really connected and resonated to my core was being provided with opportunities to hear that other side of how it might be different for other individuals, and it really helped me realize, wow, the privilege that I do carry and how I need to recognize that in every environment that I'm in, and act and carry myself throughout the rest of my life in a way that recognizes that, and then values the experiences of other people. I know for me personally, some of my most significant learning did stem from that kind of empathy, introspection type of activities.
And to that same point, when I walk in to do a workshop with young people, I might hear language that's problematic before the workshop begins, and I might be able to pinpoint what their struggles and problems are just by the way that they're interacting together. But this is where it's really important for me to exercise empathy. I don't want to just point out to them everything that they can improve upon. I want to sort of dig that out of them. So asking the questions that lead them to figuring it out for themselves. We do an activity around being allies to people in abusive relationships. And oftentimes the point comes, well, how can we be allies? People say, give advice. To who? To both people, the person portraying abusive behavior and the person being victimized. Give them advice. And I'm like, okay, raise your hand if you love to get advice from your peers. And it's usually a minority of the group that raises their hand. And I'm like, well, how many of you, rather than getting advice from your peers, would like to maybe figure things out for yourself? And then that's usually the majority that raises their hand. So I say empathize with these folks in this situation, and really keep that in mind when you're trying to support someone. Do they like advice, or are they more inclined to figuring things out for themselves? If they are more inclined to figure things out for themselves, how can I ask questions? How can I be inquisitive enough to sort of probe so that they feel like they're figuring it out for themselves as opposed to just being given the answer? To me, that's been a lot more effective in my advocacy than when I have the tendency to come in and say, hey, this is masculinity, this is what's wrong with masculinity, let's go change it together. Break. That doesn't typically work, but really engaging them in that inquiry is really the best approach that I've seen. And then just having this internalized respect. If I respect all parts of myself, my emotions, my mind, my body, my soul, all these things, then I deeply believe I'm more inclined to value those things in others. But if I am at odds, if I'm in turmoil with a part of myself and I don't know if this is how I should be, then I'm more likely to police others who are demonstrating those same traits. So, respect.
And I'm seeing that we've only got about 3 minutes left here. Derek did have another documentary that I'll just have you kind of quickly mention what it's about, and then I will plug in the hyperlink to the video when I send out all of the follow-up content inside of the follow-up email. That way you can still view the documentary, but a little bit about what it is.
Thank you, Josh. So the masculine and misrepresentation really give a reflection on the internalized and the interpersonal dynamics that institutions uphold. This documentary, 13th, really explores the 13th Amendment and how slavery was abolished, except for those who have been deemed criminal. So slavery was really never abolished, and it explores the dynamics of the mass incarceration, predominantly of male people of color, and how that has been institutionally ingrained in our system, how that has been institutionally ingrained in how we stereotype certain populations. It's really kind of a heavy film to watch, but I think it's really important as advocates to understand what those who we're serving are up against. Because if you're like me and you're serving Mexican and Black boys, they have a stereotype that works against them, and most of the media imagery does not frame them as intellects or a diverse variety of career exploration. And then there is a consequence. Well, they will be incarcerated and enslaved in this country if they are living up to the criminal stereotype that they're often portrayed as through rap music and through characters in the media. So this is a kind of heavy one, but I really urge all of us to check those documentaries out. And just want to say thank you all for joining us today. Thank you for your comments and your engagement. And I hope to cross paths with some of you outside of the digital world in the real world that we all live in.
Absolutely. And I just want to say thank you to everyone as well. Really appreciate you all taking the time. And actually turns out that this is CCAS's last webinar for the year. So just really appreciate you all being with us today. And then also hope that you all look out for our webinar announcements moving into next year for all of the up and coming webinars that we will be doing. Should be increasing the amount of webinars that we're doing on specific, culturally specific populations. We are looking to also create some webinars in Spanish specifically as well that we're really excited about being able to provide the access to information via webinars in Spanish. So hope that you all just have a look out for our announcements on upcoming webinars, and hope you all have a wonderful holidays, a happy new year, and thank you all once again.
Absolutely. Happy holidays.